A fortified facility that sustained America's heroes.
The product that came out of these buildings was used for so many celebrations and victories.
A mining settlement that was so lawless, a new kind of sheriff was needed.
It was really the women that were the strongest personalities.
And a small town where a murder sparked a revolution.
What started here was one of the most horrible things that happened in the nation, but it also brought about much needed change.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures and those who know their stories. These forgotten ruins reveal the past of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. In Washington state, one building has left its mark on American culture and fueled one of the nation's greatest treasure hunts.
This place has a storied history, unlike any other place that I know of. I can almost hear the voices of the people that are working in these areas.
We're in Tumwater, about an hour's drive south of Seattle. It's a beautiful town that's built on the Deschutes River.
On the river's open plains, a tower looms over an abandoned industrial complex.
This giant tall tower is the weird part, where you have a lot of space to build out to fit lots of workers and lots of machines. Why you'd build up, that begs some questions.
It's got these architectural hints that seem like they aim at something grander than just a factory.
Inside, there are more questions than answers.
There's white tiles on the tower wall, so maybe this was a place that was meant to get dirty.
It looks like something you'd expect in a hospital or laboratory.
This place was the heartbeat of the community. It produced a product that was iconic.
These buildings brought joy to millions of Americans. But when the nation faced dark days, its innovation helped keep the war machine rolling.
In World War II, this was considered important to the morale of the country.
For 36 years, Paul Knight's job gave him a special connection to this place.
This building is pretty much like an old friend of mine. This first entered it in 1964.
Paul is one of a few who knows its secrets, including why this tower had to be built so tall.
It was very unique in America for its time. This building utilized gravity to move materials from place to place.
Ingredients would be taken up by elevator and then by gravity would simply process down through various vats and would be treated in different ways, and at the bottom, bingo, beer.
This is the Olympia Brewery. At its peak, it produced 100,000 barrels of beer a year. As the brewmaster, Paul developed a taste for the product.
I've drank a lot of Olympia beer in my life, maybe more Olympia beer than anybody else. I've probably drank about 90,000 bottles of beer.
When I reached the legal drinking age, Olympia beer was known as a really affordable light lager. My friends and I always had a case of Olympia.
The beer was named after Washington's state capital, Olympia, which is only a few miles from Tumwater.
But this beer was popular beyond Washington State's dimly lit bars. Karen Johnson has seen it on America's silver screen.
Clint Eastwood was really in favor of Olympia beer. So whenever Clint Eastwood was in a Hollywood movie and had a chance to drink a beer, he always made sure it was Olympia beer.
Despite making it to Hollywood, the beer's origins come from a time when the West was still wild. It was the brainchild of a German immigrant.
Leopold Schmidt came to America with his family as a child. Eventually, he drifted out to Deer Lodge, Montana, where he got a job working in a brewery. And this was a line of work that really got him excited.
Leopold fell in love with brewing so much that he returned to Germany, where brewing is seen as almost a religion, to master his craft.
With his training complete, Leopold returned to America and found his way to Washington.
Leopold Schmidt is very much a hero of mine. He was the founder of the Olympia Brewing Company. The reason Leopold Schmidt wanted to build a brewery here was because of the water.
So legend has it that Leopold was looking for a place to set up a brewery, and he told his barber, and his barber said, hey, you should go use the waters of Tumwater because the indigenous people here have used it for brewing forever.
Leopold made a discovery that changed the course of beer history.
The springs that Leopold found were some of the purest brewing water to be discovered anywhere.
Having been filtered by the rocks, the water here has a very low mineral content, perfect for brewing lager.
In 1896, he built this beautiful building.
Leopold really wanted to push the importance of the water, so he came up with the slogan, "It's the water."
And we remind you on every bottle and every can. It's the water that gives light Olympia beer its exceptional quality and unchanging good taste.
Although the purity of the water created local demand for the beer, with limited advertising, Leopold struggled to sell it outside of the state. Until one of America's greatest treasure hunts gave him a unique opportunity.
In 1896, there was a discovery that sent shockwaves around the world. They'd found gold in the Klondike. This meant a massive flood of prospectors to Alaska. Of course, what do all those thirsty miners and workers need? Lots of beer.
But at that time, Alaska was officially dry, meaning people couldn't sell beer there.
Alaskan prohibition was deterring miners from moving there. So to attract a willing workforce to this desolate frontier, the federal government stepped in.
In 1899, U.S. Congress changed that rule, and Alaska suddenly became wet.
But with Alaska having been dry, it didn't have any in-state breweries.
So Leopold saw that opportunity and started shipping his beer to Alaska in 1899.
Olympia beer became the dominant beer brand in what would become these boom towns of Alaska.
These miners developed a real taste for the beer. You can only imagine how many of them would have continued to drink it when they returned home.
In just 3 years, 100,000 men traveled to the last frontier, many toasting their new fortunes with Olympia beer. It transformed this brewery into an industrial juggernaut. But when the company seemed to be at its peak, something unexpected shook its foundation.
In 1914, Leopold Schmidt unfortunately passed away at a very young age of 68. He died of a heart attack. Very tragic.
Yet the death of its champion was just the beginning of a time of change for the brewery. Things were about to be turned upside down.
1914, Washington State voted to go dry. It voted in prohibition, which was going to ban the making and selling of beer.
Just 5 years later, the entire United States followed suit, and the era of national prohibition began. Yet thanks to a bizarre twist, this brewery managed to survive.
The company pivoted. They had this hygienic workspace, they had all this equipment, so they went into business processing various kinds of products.
Here at this plant, they imported railroad cars full of apples and made fruit juice.
For over 15 years, the smells of hops were replaced with crushed apples. But when Prohibition came to an end, ironically, this brewery stayed dry.
The beer business was getting more mechanized. Factories were now electrified. So the company built a whole new facility a few hundred yards away.
At the same time, a technological revolution was reforming the beer industry.
The beer can is invented in Virginia in 1935.
Olympia Beer took a stance against this innovation.
Some people complained that the beer from a can had a bit of a metallic taste. For Olympia Beer, they were very devoted to the purity of their water, so the idea of a metallic aftertaste was not going to work for them.
So instead, they developed a glass bottle with a metal cap that they called the Stubby.
The Stubby was a shorter, stockier bottle that traveled well, fit in a refrigerator, and after it was invented here, it became the common bottle for the whole industry.
Today, this design has been adopted by other breweries across the world. In an interesting twist, these bottles played a part in winning a global conflict when, in 1941, America entered World War II.
In World War II, so many industries were taken over by the government to work on military production. But beer was considered a product that was important for the morale of the country. So Olympia continued to make their beer, but they did have to supply 15% of their output to the US military.
Can you imagine being a GI far overseas in a completely foreign place, and when it comes time to relax, having that little bit of home in your hand?
But just months after entering the war, the beer industry found itself in direct conflict with the military.
There was a national metal shortage. Metal was saved for military purposes.
This temporarily spelled the end of the beer can, which was outlawed in 1942, leaving Olympia's Stubbies as an accidentally patriotic alternative.
The Stubby bottle was the ideal package for the product because it was glass and used only a very small amount of metal for the cap.
Also, they developed what they called the picnic jug, which was a 32-ounce bottle and had twice the amount of beer with that same little metal cap.
By keeping metal flowing into the war factories, in just 4 years, America produced 86,000 tanks and 2 million trucks. Although the Stubby played its part, just 5 years later, with the war won and the metallic taste gone, Olympia finally adopted the beer can.
Their business just skyrocketed.
The brewery at one time was seventh largest in the nation. It produced over 4 million barrels per year.
But the good times didn't last. In the 1980s, rival brands grew exponentially and began monopolizing the beer market.
We had the rise of the big national brands that could advertise on the Super Bowl, that could ship their beer all around the country.
Olympia Beer just can't keep up. They don't have the name recognition.
In 2003, the brewery ceased production. The community was in shock. But I just hated the loss of what I considered the greatest place to work in the world.
"20 years after Olympia Beer stopped production in Tumwater, the original brewery is making a comeback, as the city is looking to breathe new life into the tower.
There's been talk about the whole site becoming commercial space, maybe a museum, which would be great.
Perhaps one day, beer might even be brewed here once again.
I'm hoping to come back here in some time in not too distant future to enjoy the ambience of the place and have a nice cold beer.
In the Deep South, one deserted building was the site of an event that had a huge impact on the nation.
What transpired here, you can never forget that because it was a moment that changed history.
This is Money, Mississippi, a tiny town right on the edge of the Mississippi Delta.
It's got a population of under 100 people, and all of the buildings are centered along one long road.
Compared to the rest, one structure seems dilapidated.
The building is overgrown with vegetation. You really wonder, how has it been left dormant for so long?
There's something about this building. It's almost as if no one wants to repair it.
Once, this building played the leading role in an event that sparked a revolution, transforming the lives of millions of Americans.
Well, my cousin lost his life here. I am the last eyewitness that was alive. It denotes a time in history where black lives did not matter.
In rural Money, Mississippi, Wheeler Parker is visiting a place he came to 68 years ago that changed his life.
I wish it had never happened. You can't go back and change lives. I'm an old man now at 84. I was 16 at the time.
Before the vegetation took over, this was a bustling country store, one that Wheeler Parker visited as a boy with his cousin and close friend.
He loved to make people laugh. He's a prankster, he's a jokester. He was always the center of attraction.
In the summer of 1955, Wheeler's 14-year-old cousin visited Mississippi on a train from Chicago. It was a journey that crossed boundaries of racial prejudice as well as state lines.
African Americans' treatment in the South versus up north in Chicago would be the difference of apple and oranges at the supermarket.
The South was in many ways still stuck. White people had one place and one role, and African Americans had an entirely inferior role. You still had extrajudicial murder, attacks, and lynchings.
Wheeler's cousin had been warned by his mother about these Southern ways. On August 24, 1955, he came here to Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market.
My cousin, Emmett Till, came to the store to purchase some things. I left him in there by himself.
Emmett was in the store alone with the white shopkeeper, Carolyn Bryant.
I just remember saying to myself, I hope he got it together. I hope he doesn't do anything that's contrary to the ways of the South.
Despite Wheeler's prayers, this moment began a chain of events that would change America.
What happened here at Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market is still a matter of debate, and the answer depends upon who you ask.
Local resident Gloria Dickinson has grown up with competing tales of what happened here.
He went in to buy some bubble gum, and then when he went to pay for it, he handed the lady the money. Now she said that he touched her hand, which was a no-no. And then she said some other things that he did that I'm not sure is true. She said he put his arms around her waist and asked her on a date.
Whatever occurred within these walls, what happened next is ingrained in the minds of many who grew up here. Like local mayor Johnny B. Thomas.
She came out the store angry, Carolyn Brown headed toward her vehicle, and that is when the infamous took place.
Emmett Till wolf whistled her.
When I heard the whistle, it was like a death notice because we knew that he had violated the Southern law. So we all made a beeline for the car. Now Emmett is upset, he's scared and asking us not to tell my grandfather what happened.
Although the boys feared for their lives, for 3 days, nothing happened. But that was about to change.
On August 28, 1955, Emmett Till and his cousins were in the bed asleep.
About 2:30 in the morning, I heard these people talking. I heard them at the door asking about the boys you have here from Chicago.
The men were Roy Bryant, the shopkeeper Carolyn's husband, and his half-brother J.W. Milam. They were armed and demanding retribution for Emmett's actions here.
They came to the house to get him. And I could see them eventually. I see a flashlight in one hand and a pistol in another hand. And I just started shaking like a leaf on a tree and started praying to God and asking God to just let me live.
When they found Emmett, they told him to put on his shoes and they dragged him outside.
Emmett was forced into a truck and taken to a nearby farm. What happened next would send shockwaves across the country.
This is where Emmett Till was taken on the night that he was kidnapped. And you can see it's a kind of a small place, like a little dungeon that they brought him. While he was here, they beat him and beat him and beat him to the point where he just screamed and screamed and screamed. He was hanged from those beams up there. The walls here, it's sad to say, was the last walls that Emmett Till saw in his life.
After their heinous acts, his killers, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam, needed to dispose of Emmett's body. But in doing so, they made a mistake that would come back to haunt them.
Emmett Till was placed on a cotton gin fan and thrown into the Tallahatchie River.
Emmett's body was hidden by these waters for 3 days.
On August 31st, 1955, Emmett Till's body was found on the banks of the Tallahatchie River.
Shortly after finding the body, local law enforcement began making arrangements to bury Emmett at a nearby church. But his mother had other ideas.
Mrs. Till insisted that they bring her child home to Chicago.
The coffin arrived in the Windy City nailed shut, with a seal from the state of Mississippi ordering it to stay that way. Yet in an act of defiance, Emmett's mother insisted on seeing her son once more.
His face was completely disfigured and his entire body was swollen.
When Mamie Till, Emmett's mother, sees her son's body and sees what happened here as a result of those events at the grocery and meat market, she makes a remarkable decision, one that will change the course of American history.
She said, let the world see what I see.
Mamie Till stuck to her word and allowed a nationwide African-American magazine access to Emmett's body.
So a photographer was allowed to take this picture that haunts everybody decades later.
And they described the scene of Mamie crying out, "You have not died in vain. Your life has been sacrificed for something." Pictures of Emmett Till's body created incredible outrage across the nation, specifically in the African American community.
But the magazine coverage wasn't Mamie's only courageous decision.
Mamie Till made the unexpected, brave decision to have an open casket funeral where all of the world would see the disfigured body of her son.
On September 3rd, 1955, Emmett's funeral began.
I saw Emmett's body at the funeral, and I said, this is not Emmett.
Over 50,000 people turned out to view the body of young Emmett Till.
Emmett's body was left on display for 5 days. While there was outrage in Chicago, in Mississippi, the laws of the South were on the verge of being turned upside down. On September 19, 1955, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam went on trial for the murder of Emmett Till.
It's one of the first times in American history that white men had been arrested and charged for the killing of an African American.
Their trial took place nearly 30 miles from Bryant's grocery and meat market in Sumner, Mississippi.
In the trial, Carolyn Brandt testified that Emmett Till had grabbed her, shouted at her, threatened her, and that she feared for her life.
Regardless of the scale of the altercation that took place between Carolyn Bryant and Emmett, for the men to be found guilty, they had to be placed at the crime. And the prosecution had an ace up their sleeve.
At the trial, there was an African-American eyewitness who testified that he saw the truck that they brought Emmett Till over to the barn.
This evidence, combined with the testimony of Emmett Till's uncle, who identified correctly the two men that had abducted Emmett, in a court of law today, this would be pretty strong evidence leading to a guilty verdict.
But in 1950s Mississippi, the result was very different.
It took the all-white jury just 67 minutes to give a not guilty verdict. That demonstrates the depth of racism and prejudice across the South.
Despite the trial being over, no one could have predicted the audacity that the murderers would show just 4 months later.
Months after the trial, Look magazine published an article in which it talked about J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant confessing to the murder. And they didn't mind confessing because they weren't ashamed of doing it. They were proud that they did it.
Although the men were never punished for their crimes, their actions did have a consequence. One that would irreversibly change the law of the nation.
The story that happened here in this building is such a seminal moment in the civil rights movement.
The murder of Emmett Till convinced so many in the African-American population that they just couldn't take it any longer.
African Americans across the country came together to call for direct action. And with the thought of Emmett Till firmly in her head, one woman said no.
Exactly 100 days after the death of Emmett Till, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery public bus. Her defiance spurred a boycott of the Montgomery busing system, and ultimately that boycott was led by a young 26-year-old minister by the name of Martin Luther King Jr.
The difficult years after the murder of Emmett Till galvanized the hearts of Americans across the country and led to Congress passing the Civil Rights Act, ending the age of segregation.
Standing in its barn, it's part sad and it's part good. And I think the good outweighs the sad. He made a sacrifice that he didn't even know that he was making at the time. And the country was changed through the Civil Rights Movement because of what happened here in this barn.
Today, nearly 70 years later, the story of Emmett Till has been firmly written into the history books of America. But the building where this tragic tale began has nearly disappeared.
I would love to see this building restored. I was looking at some bricks around, and they still seem to be very solid. There's a lot of history here, and we need to fix it so that we remember history, because if you don't, you're subject to repeat it.
In the hills of Wyoming, a roughneck town became an unlikely beacon of progress.
It's dusty, it's windy, there's not very much shade. It feels really desolate.
There are a few buildings here, but if you stay in the area long enough, you'll realize there isn't a soul around.
Some of them look like old log cabins, and others look like they could still serve you up a glass of whiskey.
But then up on the hill is this big, industrial-looking building.
For over 80 years, people came to seek their fortune, but a tide of change was coming.
It was a pretty amazing place to be around, exciting, lots of activity, but that was not going to last.
They say that some of the most extraordinary things happen in the unlikeliest of places, and that's certainly true here.
Tales of mysterious disappearances, murder, and justice haunt the site, but its protagonists were not the usual suspects.
It was a rough town with rough men, but it's the women who put this town on the map.
In central Wyoming, a collection of abandoned buildings on the barren plain hold an unexpected place in American history.
It was a town that sprung up overnight. There was about 300 structures, nearly 2,500 people. You know, they optimistically called it a city, and for a few years it was.
As superintendent of the site, Joe Ellis has tended to these buildings for years.
There was an incredible amount of activity and businesses, everything from newspapers to mercantiles, restaurants, hotels.
There are kind of two separate settlements here, one up the hillside and one down on the valley floor. How are they connected?
What drove all this construction lies nearby on Tim Robeson's land. His family has owned this plot for over 100 years, and a chance rediscovery explains what attracted so many people to this area.
So this was filled in, but a couple winters ago, some dirt sloughed down, which tells me almost certainly that the shaft is right here. So all the tailings piles, those are the ones that held gold.
The Carissa lode was what set off the gold rush here. A large deposit of gold was found near the surface here in 1867.
This is South Pass City, a sprawling settlement that was established in the wake of the prospectors who flooded the area in search of their fortune. The hulking Carissa Mill that towers over the town hints at the scale of the riches here.
A mill like this would be an extraordinarily noisy, dusty, dangerous place. They used chemicals like cyanide and mercury as processing agents. They operated 24 hours a day. There probably isn't another one like it in the United States.
Inside is like a mining version of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. The mill stretches across 4 levels and is absolutely crammed with machinery from a bygone era.
When I first came to the Carissa, it was slightly terrifying. I started my time here at South Pass City in charge of the restoration of this building, and the first thing we had to deal with was the hazardous waste cleanup. So there was a lot of people in moon suits vacuuming surfaces, jackhammers taking out tons of ore that had been left behind.
The sheer ingenuity of it all, the vast vats and conveyor belts and the complicated machinery, it all just shows how far mining had come from the days of a prospector with a pickaxe and a pan.
But the pioneering miners who first came here didn't have access to such technology. Fueled by the thrill of gold and the chance of striking it rich, the town became filled with ambitious young men who also hunted other pleasures.
By 1869, South Pass City is booming.
The town was full of billiards rooms, shooting ranges, and of course, saloons.
This structure is the cave. Colloquially, it was known as Fort Bourbon because it was a cold storage for things like whiskey, beer, the wines that were brought in.
Believe it or not, the miners' favorite drink was champagne. They drank it by the crateful.
A heady mixture of tough young men, liquor, and cash created an unruly town, and a firm hand was needed to keep order.
The hero of this story was known as the terror of all rogues, but was probably the last person you would expect.
South Pass City's unlikely savior would be a mother of three from New York, Esther Hobart Morris.
Esther Morris was one of the wandering figures that a town like this tends to attract. She came from a small town in New York, was widowed, and then remarried.
Here was this rough and tumble mining town, and all of a sudden it had this 55-year-old female leader. It gives you a sense of what kind of woman she was to take this on.
Esther Morris was orphaned as a young girl, but became a successful businesswoman and was active in the movement to abolish slavery. At the age of 54, she traveled west to Wyoming with her prospector husband and sons. But when she arrived in town in 1869, South Pass City was a male-dominated world.
The population at that point of time was about 55 men to 1 woman. So it was definitely a male environment.
Women had few rights in the 19th century. They could not own property, they could not vote, women had no legal claim to their own children, and often had no power under the rule of their husbands.
But change was brought about by one politician named William Bright, who introduced a bill that would change the lives of Esther and many other women.
He introduced a bill to grant the women of Wyoming the right of suffrage and the ability to hold office. This was unprecedented. It was the first time that anywhere in the United States and its territories would have even considered granting women the right of suffrage.
On December 10, 1869, the bill was signed into law, 50 years before the federal passage of a women's suffrage amendment.
For Esther Morris, an opportunity arose that hadn't been available to any woman in the history of the United States.
Esther Morris submitted an application for the vacant Justice of the Peace position in 1870. She was swiftly approved.
So when she was appointed, one of the first things that she had to do was seize the docket of the previous judge because he wouldn't release it to a woman. We are actually in the Sweetwater County Jail. It's a building that Esther Hobart Morris would have been familiar with. Almost all of her criminal cases were public drunkenness. And it was a major issue in a community that had 14 saloons.
Esther battled the bottle with great success.
The territorial secretary described an improvement in the tone of public morals and said she brought infinite delight to all lovers of peace and virtue.
Yet Esther Morris would face one deadly adversary who was much more terrifying than the usual drunks.
Whilst Esther Morris is without doubt the most famous woman to come out of South Pass City, there is another lady whose name is frequently mentioned, Polly Bartlett, the murderess of Slaughterhouse Gulch.
There was allegedly a woman who ran a boarding house outside of town that was very popular with the miners. Miners would check in, but they wouldn't check out.
It is said that Bartlett and her father would lure wealthy gold prospectors to their family inn. They were so deadly that 22 miners from the town are said to have gone missing in 1 year.
They would treat them to a meal that was laced with arsenic, and then they would bury their victims in the corral of the barn.
Supposedly, under Esther Morris's watch, Bartlett was arrested and brought in. But she was shot while in jail by a man with a shotgun and was never able to stand trial.
It's interesting, you know, in a community that is so powerfully managed and run and developed by women, that there is this mythology of a woman that is also killing men and burying them in a corral. You know, that has a real strong overtone to it, and kind of maybe indicates a part of the mindset of the time period.
Despite only serving for 9 months, Esther Morris made her mark on South Pass City and the nation. In the 150 years since, experts have wondered how the revolutionary law came to pass in a small territorial mining town.
One reason for introducing it might have been to embarrass the Republican governor, but to their surprise, he signed it, bringing it into law.
I mean, everybody in this town would have known her, and they would have known that she was probably a fair-minded person, and that she would be very well qualified for this job. So perhaps it's not that surprising that the first justice of the peace, who was a female, came out of a small town in Wyoming.
But South Pass City's fortunes would not match its forward-thinking ways. Shortly after Esther left her post, the gold started to dry up.
People were leaving and gold was really running out. That is when it signaled the decline of South Pass City.
Over the next 70 years, investors would keep the town alive until the state decided it had to act.
South Pass City was purchased by Wyoming, and it was restored for visitors to walk around in today.
South Pass City remains as an anomaly in the history of the West and the story of women's rights. South Pass City now sits as a ghost town, maintained as a tourist attraction. Yet for some, like Tim Robeson, who recently discovered gold on his land, the possibilities are endless.
If I'm right, there should be somewhere between $5 and $10 worth of gold in this pan. Hopefully more. Right now it's a hobby, but you never know. Could be so much more. There's potential, said every gold miner ever.